we go. So yeah, welcome to the discussion. So we're going to explore today how nature can improve well-being in cities. And first we'll start by unpacking, Kristina, and your expertise and how you include nature in your profession, and then move to unpack the benefits of interacting with nature, followed on by how you can interact with nature in cities and how nature can be included in internal city spaces. And then at the end, there'll be time for any questions that people have, which you can submit in the chat function, or if anybody has any questions later, you can add them in the comments and we can reply at a later date. So yeah, Kristina, would you like to start kind of explaining a brief background on you and your work and yeah, kind of how nature applies to you in your profession?
Sure. So I have like a few different areas of sort of what I do and how I practice, but one of the practices I have is this arts practice, and I'm very much in the process of exploring essentially like biophilic integration into spaces, right? Like how do we think about our connectivity and connections with nature, and then also like how do we incentivize people for making like appropriate actions and sort of and reactions to the built environment. So I do that largely as an artist, although I'm sort of exploring other ways to push that out into some of the many other hats I wear as well.
Lovely. Yeah, because like you said about before, the like floral installation and COVID memorial project that you did, and how you can introduce nature into like different like one-off projects as well, which I thought was really interesting. Would you like to explore a bit more what you
Sure,
did?
yeah, of course. So in 2020 and then really through until this fall, I created this project called the Foral Heart Project, and it was essentially about creating living sort of memorial spaces for people to connect and gather. And one of the things that was so interesting about that is that these pieces were predominantly done, almost exclusively done in urban environments. And there was something very unsettling about this idea of sort of seeing almost like this, they're laid on the ground, right? And so seeing almost these like pop-up gardens happen even in urban spaces. And it was just such a like clear reminder of this idea that like nature is like relegated to small boxes and like certain types of things when it's in a lived environment, right? However, the thing that makes nature so interesting in a rural environment is like the surprise of it, right? Where like there are flowers where there weren't flowers the day before, or like a tree, grows slowly over time, which I mean, I guess we have, but you see an animal sort of walk through your path. Like those are the things that provide like a wonder connection with nature, which is really where you have this sort of like awe and enthusiasm. And so I think the Floral Heart Project kind of tapped into that sense of how do we bring that sort of unexpected into our daily lives as a reminder of kind of a natural experience. Out of that, I've done a few other things. I have done an installation, like a digital installation piece where it talks about the COVID losses that we've had, but instead of using flowers or something like that, it uses a rose petal to represent each life that we've lost, timed so that every 2 seconds represents the passing of one day. And so what you do then, right, is also like use a natural concept as a reflection of the loss of human life. And I'm working on a few other pieces now that are sort of like on the same line, or sort of this sort of intersection point, right, between nature and natural things, but also like how do we think about the lived experience? How do we sort of create a sense of wonder? But then also this idea of like how do artistic pieces change and morph? One of the things I did was create a like biophilic office, right? Like what would an office cube be like if it was actually like filled with plants, if it actually felt like going into a forest instead of going into an office. And then and that was quite interesting because it's interesting for plants to survive, enough plants to survive to feel sort of wondrous in an office environment. And you kind of wonder, like, if the plant can't survive in here, like, how does a human survive, right? That answers like a really interesting question. And then working out of that, doing a lot of work of this sort of like intersection of like, how do we grieve? How do we memorialize? And how do we do that in ways that also kind of provoke a sense of wonder and a sense of surprise? Because I think that's the only way we can sometimes access these like really big questions. So yes, all of that work.
Yeah, because I think definitely like what you've been touching on there, kind of the organic like sense of wonder that can come with nature and how to bring that into the space is really like how you make those deeper connections with the nature
Yes.
and use it as the inspiration to it, which is so interesting. I think that's definitely what I've been trying to look at through my work here in this project and stuff, to create those like, yeah, like organic and like more just one-off experiences with nature that are so like unpredictable, in that sense that it like naturally grows and forms as it does, and then you have that personal connection to it which makes you want to care for it and go back to that space, rather than say just a one-off kind of a design scheme for a room that you don't really have that like change in. It's just oh, I'm in this space, it's pretty, I'm leaving kind of thing. You don't have the evolving sense of nature.
Yeah, I think that's so smart. And I think to me, the idea of like how you create wonder is like a really interesting question, right? And that was one of the things about the COVID memorial pieces, this Floral Heart Project, that it did like, people were like, oh, I wonder what that is. And then also like a sense of wonder when they were like, oh, here's a memorial that doesn't feel hard, right? Like when we think about memorial structures, they're often like fixed. They are metal, they are concrete, they are stone. They don't have a softness in any perspective to them, right? And so like creating a memorial that feels soft, that feels colorful, that feels warm. Other cultures do this much better than we do in North America, but in in a North American context, all memorials are cold and they are finite. And so the idea of creating something that wasn't cold and wasn't finite, that was colorful, that was soft, and that would eventually die and disappear, it was mentally incongruous for people, right? And so that kind of created this sense of like, oh, this is this is a different way to do this thing. I have also, to your point, sort of around the materials and the wonder of the change, been working on I've been working on a whole series using like around spines and bones and sort of like bone as a concept. And I'm really interested in building these sort of like large scale public pieces where we actually look at, we think about, can bone be something that is like something that we are not afraid of, but we are like inspired by or like comforted by? Because honestly, bone in your body is like a living material, right? And it is like that, like that's really interesting. And then can we create sculptures where like they are meant to be organic? So like, plants are meant to grow around them. They are meant to like erode very, very, very slowly over time. But so that idea that like every time you pass a sculpture, it is a slightly different thing than it was the time before, because that's what creates, that's like what makes our brain interested, right? That's sort of like what keeps it engaged in a piece or engaged in thinking. And that's really exciting to me. Like, how do we do that in more ways and more spaces?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's moving away from the like slightly more traditional, widely seen view of like biophilia designers bringing in a different plants or inspired by plants space and design, and kind of creating it how it can evolve and grow around like the design of like the bone and create that senses. So it's kind of like a fresher take, I think, on the principle that's being evolved, and that's definitely, I think, how engagement will grow with the concept further.
100%. I mean, and I think, oh gosh, I was just reading about something in a totally different industry, and now I'm going to forget exactly what it was. But it was about like essentially the way that like we are trying to create nature in rooms by
Yeah,
like being like plants, sunlight, wind. Like these are things that will make a room feel natural.
yeah,
But is that what you love about nature? Do you love plants and sunlight and wind? Well, like, sure, but like, what actually makes that experience of being out there like so, what is it about that sort of captures you, right? And I think that is like this sort of sense of like wonder of like, oh, this place is so beautiful, it is so epic in scale, it is sublime, it is something that is changing around me. It makes me feel very small in relationship to its grandeur, right? Like we are attempting to make the recipe rather than we are assuming that the ingredients are what makes the impact, rather than assuming that like the impact is what makes us notice the ingredients.
Yeah, definitely. The like emotional connection that you get from it is a lot stronger. And that's the bit that's hardest to replicate in different settings and things. And I think from stuff that I've been trying to look at with like immersive experiences and like using the technology side of things into a full new space in a cityscape to try and create that attachment that you get to nature in the wilderness is like, I've seen it's so hard to get it, but creating that almost all-encompassing room and space that does change whilst you're in it is one of the only ways that you can really get that response from people that I've discovered. Because doing things where you give people the plant or you get them to look after it, they do, if they are looking after it and achieve that, you can get people to achieve that like emotional connection to care and to allow the plant to grow, and then more widely use that connection to build more of a sustainably focused style of living and mindset and grow the care for the planet as it grows on. But it's a lot harder to enter a space, say in a hotel room or wherever, and feel that emotional connection unless it is all around you and being a dynamic space. Just the one-off planting schemes and this and that, is that emotional connection can be so like forgotten almost when that can be happening, because it's a lot harder to establish, I think, from just more of a traditional interiors perspective to try and install something in a space that already pre-exists. I think a lot of the kind of concepts that I've been trying to think about and how to install in a space is like a pre-existing space that then doesn't require a full refurbishment. You could add something into it that kind of creates that dynamic and engaging sense of nature, say like the projections or the soundscapes and the smells and the bits of nature that really do kind of get you in the emotive like connection to it. And I think that's the thing I've been trying to like play on, where it doesn't have to be such a really expensive process that isn't going to get you much return and all of this kind of thing, that a business, especially after COVID and reopening, is not something they can necessarily entertain in a city because they're trying to get their normal business back on track. They're not going to shut for a refurbishment. But if you introduce something that is slightly more small scale in terms of the construction side of things, you can still create an impact. And I think that's the key message I've been trying to get across to different businesses, even in different professions, say from being a graphic designer, how you can take the inspiration of nature into your work and really build different connections personally and externally in your profession, as in you can get the respite from nature, but then provide it to others, that bit of inspiration further through your work. I think that's definitely the interesting side of it that I've been trying to take recently.
I think that that really resonates with me. You said something that it sparked a conversation I had with a woman a few weeks ago. When she was little, her dad would take her. Her name's Kat Clifford. She's a journalist for CNBC. And when she was little, her dad would take her out into the wilderness, and they would have this conversation of like around what are colors that man can't make, right? And one of them was like the that really glowing, beautiful orange that a coal is in a fire, or like like not like charcoal is in a fire, is a color that like we can't make and we don't really see, right? And I think now she's a climate journalist, and I think there's probably this like very direct connection from this appreciation of sort of things that are created in nature that you can't see, to someone who's now like a real advocate for protecting the planet. And I think about that in relation to interior design, right? Or like in relation to interiors is like, there are like colors and moments and moods in the natural environment that like create this sense of wonder and create this sense of connection. But like there's something in that color point that is like really, really interesting, right? Of like, how do you make a room feel connected? And like, and is it by bringing in like some of these colors into a space that you don't expect to be in the space? Or that like, is it something, one of the, there's like a beautiful hotel, and I can't remember the name of it, in Santa Monica, that is created, I think like a Kelly Wearstler or someone like that. It's like her design, right? And it is like lots of wood and metallics next to each other, but in a way where the sense of it is like you kind of feel the same serenity of being in like a forest that is pushed up against the ocean, right? And she does that, like it's so material based by bringing in those sort of like colors and materials and moods that are so central to a space. But I don't think it takes the next step and makes you care more or like have more of a connection. And so, and I wonder if part of that is like, if you are in an interior space, how can you add things that create that sense of wonder? Like I think about that color you can't find anyplace else, right? And like I like, for me, like crystals are like, not like crystals that people have in their home to like, I don't know, if you want to do that, I think that is wonderful. But I like that, I don't know that much about that. But like those, like there is like a pink, like a crystal pink that I like feel like you don't find sort of anywhere else. And there is like a crystal, like a purple in those like true rock formation crystals, right? And it's like, if you bring in a few of those pieces, like, is that enough to sort of create a sense of wonder or surprise or like something, right? Like, what are the contemplative things? Like, how do you create space for contemplation around wonder? Or like, is it just even asking questions? Like, I've been sort of fascinated by typography lately, and like the role it can make you do in like pausing and recontemplating a space. Like maybe it's slightly more pointed in like, you know, like a chalkboard in a hotel that has something that is like beautiful and interesting and just asks you like, how are you, like, what does this remind you of? Or like, where else have you seen this color? Or like, you know, I wonder if there's a way to play with spaces like that are like low hanging, inspire wonder, create engagement, just enough to be like a thought exercise. One of the rules about advertising that my boyfriend is like forever telling me is that the best ads take you 80% of the way there, and then you have to do 20% of the work to figure it out. But when you do 20% of that work to figure it out, you feel so connected to the ad, right? Like there are these ads in New York City subways that are like, it's like a bunch of pictures. There's a name for these games, and I don't know what they are, right? But it's like a pig plus a stove plus a thing equals question mark. And then you sitting in the subway are like trying to play this game with the ad to figure it out. And it creates, and they're all done by Seamless, the like food delivery company. And it creates this level of like, it creates that level of engagement or excitement that, because you're like, oh, I figured it out. And so now I'm that much more connected to Seamless, and I feel really like invested in the ad. So I think it's that a little bit, that concept around interiors in hotel spaces is like, it is that engagement that I think we've talked about in the past, but I don't know that we've talked about this idea of like question or like connected art or like connected pieces that maybe like just like tease your brain a little bit.
I think that's so interesting, because I think it kind of builds on how nature can impact like your well-being and things like that, because it's more than just, oh, I feel less stress or less anxiety, and creates that kind of increase in creativity and productivity that makes you think that little bit more externally from the like stimulus or whatever's in front of you, that deepens the connection, I think can really play on how that impact could be measured of interacting with nature, where it's like traditionally or typically a lot more kind of, oh yeah, there's this much increase in productivity from working in a space with biophilic elements and things like that, and push it beyond to be a thing of, yeah, you were more productive because of this space, but also where did the thoughts go, and like what inspiration did you gain from it, and how much, yeah, like the sense of wonder has helped you grow that idea even further.
And like 100% part of what we talk about when we go to nature to have like a respite, right, is like increased brain functionality, more creativity, like, you know. And so it's also a little bit that, like, you know how coffee shops sometimes put up, they have like I don't like their sandwich boards, I think is what they're called, and sometimes they'll put like a little riddle, and if you like solve the riddle and you go in and you get like a free coffee, or I don't know, 50 cents off your coffee or whatever it is, like that's like a very traditional advertising technique. But like what if that was done in a space like a hotel space, but the intent of it was like to stimulate your creativity in a way that sort of inspires wonder connected to a natural environment, right? So that it's more like I don't know what the idea would be, but I think it's part of that too. Like it's almost like, what are the outcomes from being in nature that are so different from the outcomes currently of like being in a hotel? And like part of the path to get there, it's like the stuff you find in nature, right? Plants, sunlight, water, air. But like if you put those things into a state environment, and what I'm still doing is like walking through it, picking up a hotel room key, going to a hotel room where I like work, or I like immediately leave to go to a dinner and then I only come back to sleep. Like, even if that space feels marginally better, my actions in it are still really different, right? Because in a natural environment, I'm like going into the woods. I'm like going there to be refreshed or inspired, or to find wonder, or to like have a physical feat that sort of like lifts my heart rate, and right. And I guess that, right, is like, okay, so how do you mimic those activities and then the outcomes, which is like, right, like, because I have a lower heart rate, but if I'm, you know, like if I feel slightly more productive and my heart rate is lower, but I'm still in sort of like a fixed narrative experience, then like it's never going to feel quite the same. I think it's why like all of those hotels in like Bali and French Polynesia and like, you know, like where you're like truly going to get away from it all. Those hotels feel really different than like a Hilton like outside the airport, because our like that Hilton outside the airport, just if it's more natural inside, will never replicate the same experience. How do you think about that?
I think there's certain things that I've been reading about recently that are almost trying to create it so the inside would be as close to the outside as possible, from things like getting the breeze through the like
very standard stuff.
Things, and getting all of the planting and stuff. But I agree that unless there is some kind of full transportation or complete rescale jig of what the actual hotel space functions as, because I think it's very hard to create what feels like a natural environment in the same setting of the reception's here, then you go up to the lift, and then the rooms are upstairs, without like moving the space around of how it's going to function to make it feel a lot more organic and natural to experience, rather than typically what people know as, okay, I'll go to the concierge, it's there, I'll go upstairs, the room's there. It doesn't feel like a transportive experience. It feels completely normal, and as you would expect a typical hotel to be. But the other ones say, like you were saying in French Polynesia, you could have a hut that's literally out on the beach and they're like, that's your hotel room. And it's so, you feel like you're in a different space, mentally, physically, the lot. And I think it's going to take something like that for a hotel to fully create that immersive sense. So I've seen there's a hotel in Singapore where they have the full waterfall through the middle where all the rooms are.
I've been there. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's incredible. Yeah.
And it's stuff like that that really tries to change the whole, oh, I'm not just walking down a corridor with 10 rooms either side, and it doesn't feel like I'm in a different space. It feels just like I'm with loads of hotel rooms in the corridor, trying to create like a change where you go to that space and you feel like you've completely be transported into a natural environment as close as you could get. But I think,
and even micro movements in that, right? Like, you know, you're talking about the hotel corridor, and I think like we're all like, we all know exactly what that hotel corridor feels like. Yeah. However, like, what if there was a tree in the middle of the corridor? Right? Like, like what if there, like, you go down that corridor and like there are like 3 big potted plants? Like, that's like visually distorting enough of a like normalized or like stereotypical experience that it creates a sense of wonder, right? Because you're a little bit like,
what's going on?
Is in the hallway, like, right? Like, and it's almost like that, right? Like, you know, what if there were like, this is a terrible example because this is horrible. A hotel would never do this, but like if there were butterflies in your elevator, right? Because then you're just like, or like have a giant dog. And we often joke that he, like, his dream job would be to just like sit in an elevator and just like ride up and down with whoever is in it. And like, but that is animal cruelty and we will never do that. However, like getting into an elevator and there being a cat there, or getting into an elevator and there being a dog there, is distortive enough of like a normalized experience that it creates that sense of wonder, right? So I think you continue to bring me back to like a really rational place, which is, how can you do these things without a hotel doing a full scale renovation, right? And I honestly think I would be so surprised if I saw like a tree in a hallway. And you know, it would have to be a bigger enough hallway so people with wheelchairs could get around, and all of these design changes. But what if it is hanging from the ceiling? Like, what if there are plants hanging from the ceiling in a hallway is enough for me to just be like, this feels weird and different, and like that stops me, right? Or like, you know, you think about your room experience, like you come in with a suitcase, you want to put your suitcase down somewhere, and like, what if, you know, the thing that you put it on is covered in moss, right? Like that, like, because then I'm like, oh, this is weird. Should I put it on this? This is a garden. Is it art? Like what? Like, why are they doing this? What are they trying to make me think of? And that also feels enough. Like maybe it's about like subverting the action moments, like with something different, rather than like wholesale revamping the design of the entire experience. And I think it's about like not putting too much of the burden on that business hotel customer, but also knowing that like sucks, like business travel, even if you're staying like beautiful, wonderful places, it always kind of sucks, right? Like you're not home, you don't have your food, you're like away from your pets. Like maybe that's glorious, but then also it becomes terrible. And so like what if to get into your hotel room was like, it was like, you know, everything's on your phone now, right? So what if it was like, fine, you can scan your barcode, or it's like, you know, enter this game, like solve this riddle and we'll bring you a free glass of champagne, or like something like that, right? So like all of those things that are so normal could have like an element of surprise.
Yeah, definitely. And it's the interaction then as well, that you feel like you've got more from the venue and the space, but also they're getting that from you at the same time. So you can build up the relationship a bit more easily than like what you said kind of before of it. Typically, a lot of people will just go to a hotel and check in and leave. like stay the night, and then you're straight out, and you have no emotional ties or affiliation with the place at all, and you might go back, you might not. Whereas if you have that kind of interaction of space, then you feel more connected to them and what they've offered you as well, so they can get the custom back and you build the rapport between them. So it's, yeah.
I mean, I think there's like, and also if you're a hotel who like wants to play a role in making your customer more connected to a natural experience, or like more active in awareness about climate change, or more active in awareness about how their impact in the world can impact X.
Yeah.
Like, be a leader. Like, I think we sometimes forget, like, a hotel feels like such a blank space, but a hotel property is like a great classroom in a sense as well too, right? So it's like, you know, you put those cards that are like, by doing this, we save 6 gallons of water. And you're like, okay, but you also save like $85, right? So like, you know, like, but that works. Like that, like those cards did raise a level of awareness amongst travelers about like the impact. And like, so who have historically been a frequent traveler, I'm like one of those people who's like, oh yeah, okay, like I don't want you to change my sheets. Like I don't need new towels. Like I'm gonna stay here for 3 nights. Like it's not a big deal. But like, what else can a hotel teach me, right? Like, could it teach me where the door comes from? Like I can scan it and it's like, this is this kind of hardwood and we got it from this place. And like when we refurbished, like we chose when we refurbished our hotel not to put new doors on because the cost of buying 700 new doors for a hotel is this much money and has like this negative impact on the environment, right? Like, hotels can be learning centers or education centers if that is part of the mission or part of what would inspire them to think about this kind of design in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of like what we discussed about before. I know we said in like a restaurant space, how the food and stuff, it's a similar concept of if they're doing the actions of sustainability, how to showcase it, like even through like a small AR experience or something that can demonstrate their sustainability actions and their actions that can then inspire, like you say, and inform the clients to continue that into their life. And even through the like natural design elements and stuff, if they incorporate it in such an intrinsic way into the space that does engage people, a lot of like travelers or customers into that space could then take that connection home and go, how can I put that in my house? Or how can I keep that connection going in my work and my profession and give it to other people? And if they can create that like lasting impact from the small interaction, you've really got the growth of how it can get implemented into different sectors and spaces through that like one small point. So I think there's so much like growth expansion that can come from it.
Think about like lighting, right? Like for hotels to switch to like high caliber LED lights so that they don't have to change, like, so those light bulbs last for like 15 or 50 years, right? Is like a hotel telling me that. Like there are so many people who just like who've not thought about their light bulbs in like a billion years, right? And a hotel being like, we use a certain kind of light bulb because it's better for the environment, but also like we only have to change it once every 30 years. And then asking like, would you try to do the same thing in your home? Right? It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And now I'm like, that like question is me thinking about it, right? There's like there's a thing comedians talk about it where if you do this noise, like everyone expects it to answer with, right? Like, and a question does the same thing, right? Where like if you ask a question but you don't provide the answer, the brain like wants to answer the question, right? It like wants to. It's just like it's like hard to walk away from that, in the same way that like musical cue, if you don't hear someone end it, you do it. Like you do it. There's a whole study on this, and I forget the name of the song and all of those things. So apologies for that. But that's like what businesses can do with questions. And so like looking at legislation, like in New York City, there's a lot of legislation coming down now about like integrating green solutions into building architecture, et cetera, et cetera. And so something like asking these questions doesn't hit the legislative goals, right? But it does hit on your job as a hotel, which is, depending on how you define it, to be a space where people want to come, that like engages people, who will then go and recommend to other people to stay in your hotel, right? And so thinking about some of these design exercises as like marketing exercises, or some of these design exercises as like customer service exercises, I think it helps to like it takes budget out of different places and puts it, right? Like if you could make it a marketing cause, it sort of like takes budget out of that and puts it here. But I think that I think that's an interesting question too, right? Of there's like the whole aesthetic of it, and then there is design as design, and then there's design as marketing, and then there is design as customer service, and then there's design as like ideological imperative, right? And like if you can hit on multiple levels, then it creates like a more sort of like full experience. I mean, I think it goes back to public art, right? Which is like, we have these memorial structures. They are like concrete blocks, and like you don't normally engage with them on like Veterans Day. Maybe like a wreath gets placed, or a Memorial Day, a wreath gets placed in the U.S. and that's sort of it. And the Vietnam Memorial really like broke memorials in a way, because it was like so plain that it felt so accessible. But what was so interesting is people came and they left ordinary objects. They left a pack of cigarettes. They left a sandwich, right? And that helped people feel like they could engage with the memorial in a way that was different than they had been previously felt allowed to engage with memorials in the past. However, and I think there were a lot of questions around Vietnam, so that's sort of like there was a lot to like say and do around that memorial space. But you think about it, and like what we want to do when we are grieving is like express our grief and like mourn our losses and connect with other people who are grieving. And yet and so the form of those like public memorials like often falls short of that experience in and of itself, because I think we're saying like we need to memorialize the thing we lost, but what we really need to do is like help the people who are grieving. And so I think I just think there are like questions in that on like how many different layers you can engage with something that makes it different. Anyways, we've gone a bit off track, but I think there's something in that.
Yeah, definitely, because I think kind of like the point from that is almost like access and like approachability to the space, and like how you can get people involved on the different levels and really feel that they have their place to get involved in it and like interact with that memorial space like that. But it does also, it can carry over to different like naturally designed spaces, or spaces that aren't, that say some restaurant spaces at the moment, or you might go to them, like I've been approaching people to get involved in different projects. And a lot of people who are unaware of natural design stuff, obviously you can inform them and things, but it's harder for them to feel like that's a space that they can get involved in and access, because they think that it's nothing to do with their business. They're like, oh, I run a bar. What do you mean? Like that's not my field. We don't do that kind of thing. But realistically, a lot of it is like a lot more consumer driven at the moment. People are very much more sustainably conscious, and they want to get involved in these kind of projects, and people will like go to those spaces if it's offering it. But it's kind of showing businesses and other professionals that it is an accessible like space. It's like this kind of biophilic design is so kind of sounds so unapproachable as a topic that people don't know what it is. They don't know how to think these things.
And the word, right, like biophilic, is you're just like, what does that mean?
Like,
and it's not like a normalized word, and like it's just it's a strange, funny word. And I think, and I mean, so often the approach we're given to it is like 1000% in, or like not, right? It's sort of like a Frank Lloyd Wright style house where there's a waterfall running through your house, right? Or it's like, right, like I think thinking about the iterative steps to, it's all iterative, right? And like iterative except sort of against a cliff, right? Like we kind of have like 10 years to solve the climate crisis and like see if we do or not. But it's like, how can we know that the like millennial, Gen Z, Gen Next, like customer base is interested in sustainability, right? Like this is like a clear marketing selling point for bars and restaurants and hotels. Okay, well, it doesn't, if it's not a wholesale renovation of your space or your product or your concept, right? Then like there are so many other sort of smaller entry points into that space, which are about like showing ideological alignment, right? Like we are part of this community. And then iteratively, like getting your customers more aligned with that concept as well as you grow your business in alignment, right? Like it is something that doesn't have to be scaled. I am a lot of my other work is in like enterprise software, and like that's, and like as a day job outside of being an artist, I work in enterprise software, and so we have all these like software as a service models, right? And it's almost interesting to think about like sustainable design as a service, right? Is there like a slow iterative way for people to like get into the process where you're like, here plants, right? Like let's just start there. Like let's put plants in your lobby. Okay, you got plants in your lobby, like great. Like what about like QR codes in people's rooms that talk about where items come from that are local? Like, okay, cool, right? Like these are all relatively low cost things. Like, you know, and in that process, as they are sort of buying into the ultimate future vision, there is sort of like ways that they can step in on a quarterly or a yearly basis into scaling up from there. You are smiling like this is something you've already been giving a lot of thought to.
Yeah, definitely. Like the like staged approach of how it doesn't have to be like all or nothing either side of it. Like how, because I think there is so much that can be achieved in like almost like warming up both the business and the customer to this idea where it doesn't have to be such a stark like thing that maybe seems slightly risky for different businesses or people that they don't want to put off their customer base, or they don't know how people are going to react. If you kind of build it up stage by stage, then you can really like integrate it with the existing customer base but bring in new ones, which I think is the main way that the message can grow, but it also be so much more approachable to different people's professions and lives, that it isn't completely something unfamiliar to them, that as it changes and becomes a grander thing in the certain space, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I expected this is great, or not expected, but they're still engaged and surprised, but they're not against it. They're like welcomed.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's part of the challenge, right? It's like the design of the future. You know, you go to that hotel in French Polynesia and you're just like, cool, awesome. No way I can replicate this in my own house or my own life, right? Like it just feels so far. Whereas, I mean, I have a fair number of plants in my home, but I don't have like, I'm not like a jungalo like design enthusiast, right? But the amount of people who come into my home and are like, oh, you've got a lot of plants in here, is like kind of shocking, right? And I think a lot of people who don't have any plants in their home go from like no plants in their home to a hotel with no plants, and all of that feels so comfortable, right? And I've been actually reading this wonderful book, which at the moment is underneath my computer, but so I'm gonna have to. But it's this book, and it's here, I'm terrible at this kind of stuff. Okay, it's by this guy, Andrew Nemhas. I'm gonna get his name wrong. Alexander Nehamas. But it's called Only a Promise of Happiness, the Place of Beauty in the World of Art. And it's quite interesting relative to this conversation, because a lot of what it's talking about is what we find beautiful and how we find things beautiful, and how culturally we have a narrowing of what we consider beautiful. But one of the things that they talk about a lot is what we find beautiful is things that we are comfortable with, right? Things that we have seen before, things that are sort of a normalized experience. And I think as our home aesthetic changes, obviously our interior design aesthetic changes as well. And what we require from hotels, that begins to morph too, because we want it to feel like our home, right? Like that's why people bring more and more pets to the hotels, right? Like, but I now, because I live in a home that has a lot of plants, if I go to a hotel room and it doesn't have any kind of greenery, it feels uncomfortable for me, right?
Yeah.
And so when I'm like booking hotel rooms, I'm like, I'm not going to stay at a Hilton. I'm not going to stay at a Hyatt, blah, blah, blah. I'm like looking for like smaller boutique hotels because it feels more comfortable, because that is like an aesthetic that I have become so comfortable with. And I think that is that sort of process of iterative change. And then the question is like, how do hotels who are embracing that design concept iterate aligned with the industry so that you are just enough ahead of the customer that you can lead them, but not so far ahead that your ability to lead has been destroyed?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so interesting what we said about like adjusting to your space and like your setting, because I think that's something that it can work. Like you say, you have the plants and then you go to the space, but it could also work the other way, where people go to the space and then they want it in their home as well, and then they put it in their office, and then it's got both channels to it. And I think that's definitely incorporating like the workplace setting in different professions is the other kind of sides to the triangle, in a way, of like your home life, your work life, and the hospitality of the fun, and kind of how they could all interact to create a similar environment that can then adjust and keep building upon it.
Yeah, one of the hotel concepts I find extremely interesting is hotels where everything inside that hotel is actually for sale, right? Like, you go into the room and it's like, I mean, they won't sell you the bed, right? But they'll be like, you can buy these same sheets in our online store. Like, you love this plant, you can buy one in our online store, right? And like, and I think that also motivates that behavior in a way that is also like financially beneficial to the hotel, right? And like, hotels have been selling like hotel robes for forever, right? Like you stay at the Four Seasons and you can buy the same Four Seasons robe, or like I don't know, who is it, the Hyatt or Hilton, like their mattress is like they like really awarded, so like you can also buy their mattress or whatever. Like you fly on Delta and they have like Hilton pillows or Hyatt pillows, or that's terrible because I get the two confused. But in that way, like that idea is also so interesting of, if you're investing into a design philosophy and an ethos and a lifestyle, and like what can you also sell back to your consumers? Like how do you create that additional line of resiliency for your business? And I mean, if you're a hotel and you have X number of rooms, you are getting a like to the trade price. You can resell it back to a consumer. Maybe you also don't want to sort of run that sort of a business, but you look at a hotel, right? And you're essentially like selling rooms to people. And then it's like, okay, well, can you sell more to them? You already have a fit or a sort of set customer base. And then it's like, here's a way to live. I am showing you a different way to live. Now I am allowing you to take the way I've lived to show you, and to like bring that back into your own home. That model fundamentally makes sense. And so I also a little bit think of it as like a hotel who doesn't think of their hotel rooms as a showroom is like missing like a potentially extremely lucrative line of business, or at least an opportunistic line of business that then is also for like people who can't buy into the hotel, but who can buy into an online item to like be like, oh, this is an X from this hotel. Like it is another work stream, but it is a line of resiliency that makes sense for a business.
Definitely. 'Cause then, like you say, the people who it's like buying into the brand in a different sense, so you can take that bit into your life, even if you can't stay there or in your personal
Right.
life.
Exactly. I mean, it's all a brand play, right? It's like, and then it's like, but then if people have stayed in your hotel and you have this beautiful blueberry lemon soap and it smells good and it feels good, people buy that and they bring it home. And then they are washing their hands every day with this blueberry lemon soap that just reminds them of staying in your hotel. That like creates that cyclical desire to go back to your hotel, right? Like it is a marketing strategy to do that. But if you can get people on both hotel room and then you can get them on the sale of the soap, I mean, and hopefully it's a higher price point item, right? It's like a beautiful vase that the plants are in, or it is a beautiful painting that's hanging in the room. Like all of that is line of business. Like one of the things I think you talk about is like in a post-COVID world, how do you convince a hotel to believe in doing this kind of work?
Yeah.
And then the resulting question to me is like, well, can you convince them that it will make them money? And like the answer is like, yes, if you want, like particularly like your perfect core customer, right, is like an older hotel who no longer, like the majority of their people who come to their hotel are like over 40 years old, right? And so they need to diversify to a younger consumer, but they also need to diversify in case of global pandemic and like other things that like could harm the sort of foundational aspect of their business, right? And so for them to like introduce a new design ethos, and like it doesn't have to be all of their rooms, right? It could be one floor of rooms and then it's like really special, book on those rooms, they charge a premium price point for them, and then like in those rooms, like you love this, love this blanket, you can buy it online for 400 euro, like like want a plant just like this, like we happen to sell the plant, or like here, go to plants.com to buy it, but we get like an affiliate code off of it, right? Like it feels like there's this whole part of it that doesn't have to be burden. It can be monetization and resiliency for them as a business, while also being like the right thing to do for the world and like leading people into a different way of living. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's such an interesting like kind of model of how to engage people and like brands in it that I think is definitely widely overlooked, like especially in the UK. Like I don't feel like many smaller hotels or stuff like that consider doing the kind of, you can buy these bits and sell it, and it is like a completely separate like branch of the business that could be so lucrative. And especially like say with the design, to get people really engaged and take the bits home with them or really develop that connection, is kind of invaluable as a sense of you can literally have exactly the same as what's already been pre-designed for you and take it home. I think it's
right.
great.
And like buy it all, right? Like buy all the stuff. Like we'll tell you who the mattress maker is, we'll like tell you, we'll like sell you the sheets, we'll sell you the blanket. And I mean, when I think about the future of retail, I like, we talk about experience-based travel. We talk about like that being sort of a foundational part of what people is buying, and people aren't going to malls and they aren't going to shops. Okay, so like then our experiences we must be able to purchase via our experiences, right? And so why aren't our experiences selling us all of the things? Like not that everything in it needs to be for sale, but like facilitating a way for us to purchase the things that are part of the experience. And that applies to kind of any experience that you're a part of. Because even I like bought some clothes offline, and then I recently went to a retail store to return them. And I was like, oh, wait, like I just like haven't been doing very much shopping because of the pandemic. And I don't know, I try not to buy like a million things. But going to a store is a beautiful experience. But going to a store is in no way like different than going to a hotel.
Yeah.
And so like, why can't a hotel sell you a new brand of, sheets that are ethically sourced and environmentally conscious and that make you feel more connected to nature, right? Like all of those things, I think there's a large opportunity there.
Definitely. I think that's so interesting to think about. It really kind of summarizes everything that we've been trying to like interact on together. Though I think it's very exciting, like avenue to see how it can grow in the future and everything. I think to summarize everything today, what would be your takeaway for one kind of easy idea to interact with nature today in your work or in your life, or how are you going to bring it into your day?
Cultivate wonder. Like,
Yeah.
like cultivate surprise and wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is what I love about nature, is that I am constantly like awed and in wonder of what I see. And if we could do that in our individual lives, like, does that bring us closer to respecting sort of that same awe that we just get naturally by engaging in nature?
Definitely. I think it does. I love that phrase. Like, it's so brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much for all of your time today. It's been brilliant to chat with you. And yeah, it's been a very interesting discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Always so nice to do this. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.